and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we're taping a special edition of Gay USA this week. We're taping it about a week early, so we're not going to be giving you the news. We're going to be giving you the long view with three fantastic activists, veteran activists in this movement. Shall we?
Well, we want to have a roundtable discussion of issues and feelings, because we're all feeling pretty upset these days, and we just wanted to plumb some other minds than ours, because heaven knows our viewers have heard enough from us over the months.
So joining us are Sarah Schulman, who is an American novelist, playwright, nonfiction writer, screenwriter, and AIDS historian, and distinguished professor of humanities at the College of Staten Island. Your activism began with the Vietnam War, going out with your mom, yes?
Yes, when I was 8.
Okay, and you've worked on women's reproductive rights, ACT UP, and the ACT UP Oral History Project, and you're the co-founder of Lesbian Avengers, and you write many works of fiction and nonfiction. We had you on when you wrote Ties That Bind, Familial Homophobia and Its Consequences back in '09, but your most recent one is Maggie Terry, a former police detective's addictions jeopardize a murder case, and your return to pulp fiction.
Yes, well, it's a consequence of teaching on Staten Island for 20 years, where a lot of my students have been police officers and also COs at Rikers and Port Authority Police, and so I thought I'd bring some of what I learned about them.
We want to hear about Staten Island. We also have Chase Strangio, staff attorney at the ACLU's LGBT and AIDS project and a frequent guest here. Your expertise is on the treatment of transgender and gender nonconforming people in police custody, jails, prisons, and other forms of detention.
That's not a happy story.
Well, you used to be director of prisoner justice initiatives at the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. And you founded the Lorena, say the name, Borjas? Mm-hmm. Borjas Community Fund, an organization that provides direct bail bond assistance to LGBTQ immigrants in criminal and immigration cases. Welcome.
And you've been telling us that the ACLU is desperately overworked these days.
The ACLU is desperately overworked, although I'm glad you mentioned the Lorena Borjas Fund, because we founded that fund in 2011 at the height of cooperation between immigration enforcement and local law enforcement under Obama, and I think it's a reminder of how much resistance work has been happening for a long time, and so we are overwhelmed and overworked, but we know how to deal.
Okay.
And also joining us is Mustafa Sullivan, who is the executive director of Fierce NYC, which is, now let's get this right, a membership-based organization building the leadership and power of LGBT and queer youth of color in New York City, based in the Bronx. You develop leaders in the community among young people, and you have over 15 years experience in these kinds of services, and you used to be the director of national programs at the GSA network in Oakland, California.
Yeah, that's right.
And we know each other from working on some justice cases in the Bronx. Welcome, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming here. So, Mustafa, what's on your mind these days in the midst of the horror show that we're all living daily?
Being caught in the middle. I feel like a lot of times we're in this weird situation where you have a horrible, tyrannical president, and you have ineffective progressives who are not really doing anything on criminal justice. Tomorrow marks the 4th year that the city still has done nothing around the death of Eric Garner. And so we're literally in the crosshairs of huge battles that are happening nationally and all over the country when it comes to a president that's targeting our people, and then you have elected officials who aren't protecting us.
And when you mention Eric Garner, this was someone, a police officer, put a chokehold on and killed.
Yeah, exactly.
For selling loose cigarettes.
For selling loose cigarettes, exactly. And so Fierce has always fought against police brutality and the violence that comes from police, and we know that it's both a local issue and a national issue. And it's unfortunate that we have a mayor in this city and a New York Police Department that refuses to acknowledge their own culpability and responsibility to the communities. But we organize and we fight. We fight against that. In the midst of all of the stuff that's happening nationally, we still know that the New York Police Department is one of many enemies of our communities and folks who are committing ongoing violence.
And that's a very long story with the NYPD.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the beginning really starts, I mean, if you study history, it starts with slave patrols, but we are supposed to be out of slavery, but we still, for whatever reason, believe that police should be harassing Black and brown people all over the country.
Well, let's get into more of that, but Sarah, what's on your mind these days?
Well, right now my primary commitment is Palestine solidarity. I'm on the advisory board of Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a pro-Palestinian Jewish organization with 13,000 members and growing. And I'm also involved in RAYA, which is the research on the American-Israeli alliance. And we're about to release a report showing that American police have been trained in Israel to learn strategies that they have used against people of color in the United States, and that they're also using Israeli-made weapons throughout the U.S. So we're going to be releasing that in a few weeks.
Well, I detect a theme here. Chase, you're actually working on prison issues, but what else is what in these days is on your mind?
I mean, so much is on my mind, and I am just really always thankful to be engaged in dialogue, because one of the things I am concerned about is that in this moment, and particularly among legal activists and lawyers after the announcement of the Justice Kennedy retirement, that we're gonna turn into a very sort of responsive, reflexive mode and sort of think that the LGBTQ movement's primary goal is to defend marriage equality or to have a very retrograde approach to all of the work that needs to be done. And so from my perspective, this moment really requires us to think in terms of how smart our LGBTQ movement has been in the leadership of organizers of color for a long time under very repressive conditions at state, local, and federal level. And instead of just panicking and trying to hold on to formalistic legal gains, really thinking through, well, what does it look like to build power in the long term while we're still concerned about the federal judiciary, and sort of balance the harm reduction tools that the legal system inherently needs to employ, and with a longer term vision of justice.
Well, and I buy all that, and I certainly am terrified about the entire justice system, and certainly the legal system.
As you should be.
Yeah, exactly. But let me push back for a second, because there are real-world consequences for people if they lose particular rights, aren't there? Just to take an example of marriage, if the Supreme Court says the federal government no longer has to recognize it, it's going to be state by state, all federal benefits disappear, isn't that going to have real impact on people?
It absolutely will. There's a risk to any erosion of any Supreme Court precedent that, in some way protects civil rights. I think the key is thinking through, how do we allocate resources in our, sort of big picture defense of the full community? And if we panic and say the most important thing is to preserve Obergefell, which is the Supreme Court decision that struck down remaining bans on marriage, what I think we do is just abandon the work of the full community. I think that we actually do very little to defend the rights of anyone by having the sort of same top-down approach to work that we saw in the movement that brought marriage to the center in the first place. So what I want to see us do is really, think and learn from history and pull from the tools that our movement has always had by centering the most vulnerable people, and think about, well, what can we do in this moment? Because the answer isn't just to pass compromised legislation or to devote all of our resources to the defense of marriage equality. It's much bigger, it's much more complex, and requires us to also acknowledge all of the horrible things that have been happening for a long time at the local and state levels, instead of just have a sort of myopic focus on Trump.
Right. I mean, when you think about women's reproductive rights, I mean, the New York State legislature passed abortion rights, or decriminalized abortion, in 1970, when both houses were in the hands of Republicans. It was a very different Republican Party. Supreme Court comes along in 73, Roe v. Wade, a lot of exhaling, and same thing with marriage, not taking power back in the states and saying, let's write all this down, let's have power so we can do a lot of things. Just because we got our thing, let's not give up. And so what is going to happen around those issues?
You skipped a very important event, which was the Hyde Amendment in 1979. And that's when the Hyde Amendment was upheld by the Supreme Court.
Explain what it is.
Okay, so the Hyde Amendment denied poor women federal funding for abortion. And what that did was it separated the idea of an abstract right, like the right to legal abortion, versus access. And then it became an issue of poverty. And that's when the movement abandoned that issue. And that was the beginning of the chipping away of abortion rights. And we see that in every regard. Every right that's been won has been contextualized for people who can afford to have that right. And we have never recognized a legal right to access. And you can see that as well in AIDS activism.
So is it because, okay, that just affects poor people, we don't care? I mean, but people...
Yes.
Yes.
But I mean, people wanting to take the Congress, take their state legislatures, it seems like many of us on our side haven't paid close enough attention to what's happening in terms of
I think, when you really look at the way that these elections are happening, we see more and more districts that are being gerrymandered in a way that really isolates people and only brings together the people who are most likely to be, basically baited, right? Like baited around marriage equality. Clearly, there's a huge bait that really pushed Trump into office around immigrant rights and around the very idea that this is sort of our country. So I think that when we really look at the elections, there's that problem, and there's also the problem on the Democratic Party side, which is not really getting in touch with the base in a really direct way. Instead of really pushing for economic issues that affect all communities, affect all poor people, they often, fix small problems or put themselves out there to talk really big progressively, but not actually working directly to really deal with these larger issues that are issues of poverty all across the country that affect all different types of races. But you also can't get out of the conversation about race and being intentional and being specific about race. And this is what happened with the immigrant rights debate. The Democrats have been so interested and invested in pleading to this larger set of people who are really fearful and violent and racist around immigrant rights, that they haven't actually pushed for what we know is the reality, which is we don't actually need borders. We don't have an immigration problem. We don't have all these fake issues. We don't need a wall. But yet the Democrats and many progressives haven't really dealt with that. So now we have a new form of slavery happening right now at this time.
So I feel apologetic about trying to bring it always back to some kind of concrete question, but I think the majority of people in this country are tied into a very conventional worldview. So I'm wondering whether you think the rise of Trump and his henchmen is provoking anything genuinely different on the left that will produce anything different in the elections this year, 2 years from now? Are people rising up? You see a lot of stories on the news about activism in local communities and people getting out to fight back. Is any of that real?
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, but around the country, it has to be more than just...
Queens?
Okay.
What could be more diverse?
Yeah, but
look
really.
who won the presidency, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And Bernie Sanders also is not unfamiliar with New York politics. I mean, not to say it's about New York, but...
Well, I'm just saying, in reaction to what we've now lived through for the last 18 months,
there is the rise of an overt socialist component to the Democratic Party, and there is an overt effort by the leadership, like Nancy Pelosi, to squash that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, how progressive that wing actually is questionable, because the person you just mentioned, Alexandria, just a while ago, she backtracked on her pro-Palestine politics. So we don't really know exactly, but we do see my candidate, Cynthia Nixon, who I'm happily voting for governor. She has openly called herself a democratic socialist, and this is something that's new in American politics.
I agree. But I don't see that happening in Iowa. I may be wrong, or Texas, But I'm wondering whether those Democratic candidates, the new women running for the House, the Beto O'Rourke running in Texas for the Senate against Ted Cruz, are any of these people going to win, and are they going to make any real difference in the country?
If they knock on the doors, if they get down on the ground and talk directly to people, I think that's really besides the commitment to democratic socialism or the growing urge towards democratic and progressive socialism, there's actually the work of actually knocking on the doors and talking to people. And we can say a lot of things about the current president, but there was real conversation that was happening on the ground that was not happening in the Democratic side.
Agreed.
The idea was that once Sanders lost, and we know that the Democrats handicapped Sanders, then all of a sudden we were all expected to just be enthusiastic. And so if we have any hope to win any of these elections, including the midterm, the Democratic Party has to significantly, and whoever's on the left has to significantly knock on people's doors and have real conversations about these issues. You can't just pretend that pointing at Trump is going to be the answer, that, oh, I'm anti-Trump, but you still are not supporting any of the issues that people really care about. You're still not fighting for a community. And the reality is that we're being brought into a civil war. And the side that's for xenophobia, that's for white supremacy, is riling up their base while we're just being expected to be outcast and outraged, and then we're just going to go vote, which is not the case.
Well, let's talk about something we're facing almost immediately, which is the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. The Democrats seem to be going after him on he's going to get rid of abortion rights and he's too friendly to presidential power. But what about do you think it would resonate with people if they pointed out that he always sides with management over workers and average people and labor? Do you think that would get people upset enough in this country to stop a Supreme Court nomination?
No. I feel like
hasn't stopped Trump.
Well, I think we could not be any more anti-worker, anti-labor in this country. I don't think that's going to rile people up. And I'm concerned that, in general, that we aren't doing anything to stop the judicial nominations. We're not mobilizing. We're not drawing attention to the impact of a packed federal judiciary with Trump appointees. And I have grave concerns about the rule of law as a general matter and the reliance on courts as a general matter. And I am certainly not one to go out there and say legal change is the answer, because I don't believe it is. I do think it is a tool in our, sort of ever-diminishing toolbox, and that we should be deeply concerned about the appointments to the judiciary. I don't think that I've seen anything close to an effective strategy being proposed to stop Kavanaugh. I think that perhaps some people would respond to, well, do you remember what happened with Merrick Garland and the ways in which Mitch McConnell sort of delayed that nomination? I don't think so. But what I know is not helping are sort of sympathetic profiles in the Washington Post talking about him as a soccer dad and these ways in which both sides' journalism and the humanizing of people who are quite literally committed to sort of mass eradication of groups of people in the United States is so deeply troubling that I look to the journalists at the Washington Post and the New York Times for their coverage of this as being absolutely sort of an arm of the most sadistic parts of the government right now, honestly.
And folks, he's got more credit card debt than you can ever imagine.
Or baseball tickets.
Yes.
But that didn't work with Marco Rubio. I don't know. I think that makes him seem more like that's something people can actually relate to. Like we all have
$100,000?
Well, no, maybe not $100,000, but it's like who I don't know. I don't like sort of looking at people's spending habits and sort of making it about that. I think he's a really dangerous person, and I'm concerned about how we talk about him overall. But I think credit card debt is something people can relate to as a general matter. Maybe not the extent of it, but I would rather say he is part of an elite class that of white men who have spent their lives getting into government on purpose with the goal of building our system founded on chattel slavery and encoding the legal norms that we've long relied upon to kill people. That's what I think we should talk about.
You're raising an issue. We just went through the 4th of July. We had the wonderful Patricia Okomo at the foot of the Statue of Liberty. But I mean, I actually read it this year. I mean, I always go to a reading of it that Norman Siegel does.
The Declaration.
At the Declaration of Independence. And I mean, what could be simpler? It's in the first paragraph. When things become intolerable, you need it doesn't just say, you know, you need a midterm election. It says you need a new system of government. This system has never worked for us, for average people, or for justice. Never, ever, ever.
But that's why Trump got elected.
Yes.
Because his voters hate the system, see that it doesn't work for them, and they are the ones in rebellion.
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a system.
They got baited into believing.
Well, I think all that's true, but it was an act of rebellion on their part.
We can talk about
it. Was an act of racist. Yeah. It was an act of racist white supremacists. This is my country, and I hate Obama. Trump would never have been president if he did not immediately start to attack Obama on what I would say the average intelligent person, and yes, I'm saying voters who voted for Trump are not the most bright. The average intelligent person is not going to simply be baited by like a phony immigration issue.
Sure.
Someone who is saying police kill black people on a regular basis. I mean, he has been clearly been a racist for so long.
Always.
That the set of people who voted for Trump, I'm sorry, are not. Their vote is not necessarily going to change. What's actually going to change, the majority of them are going to be influenced when we actually directly attack those policies and directly attack the larger system, right? Like, let's be real. How did Trump even get someone to step down from the Supreme Court? We're not even looking into that issue. So we're running to who he's nominating. But it's a huge crime. It's a huge crime, and this is one of many like payouts, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really one of the main issues with fascism is that government becomes a money-making entity and becomes synonymous with business. You can't legislate about that. People have to understand that they're going to have to rise up against beyond this judicial system and beyond what we see as an election process, because he could win another election if we don't do something significant to change the rules.
Andy has an idea.
Under this system, what I'm talking about is we can't marginalize racists in a system that gives 2 senators to every little state. We can't. It was designed to protect slavery in the first place. We have to look at that and say, we're better people. We want a system that actually might reflect our values, that we don't have gerrymandered districts. We have districts where the diversity of America is reflected. The people are here, I think, who can do it. But the system will never allow it. Well, that's the system I'm talking about, the basic structure of American government. And if we don't think bigger about these things, we're just going to keep knocking our heads against the wall, I think.
I agree with that, and actually I think that I'm not one who believes in any conspiracy over Justice Kennedy retiring, to be honest. I think he did it on his own because I think he's part of the system too. And I think we looked at this court and we relied on Kennedy and we saw him as a quote unquote moderating force, but he was a moderating force in the direction of sort of power and interest, and to think better of this court and this system is, I think, to just continue to perpetuate the truth that it is always going to serve the interests of the people who set up the country for the purpose of maintaining anti-blackness, chattel slavery, and the racism and capitalism that we know this country was founded on. And so I am a lawyer in the system. I build the system. I recognize that there's an inherent contradiction. I believe in it as a harm reduction tool. I see it as the source of the problem as well. And so I just think we have to hold those things. And I think that, Kennedy's opinions, he did some things that were less bad. But I think he is just as much a part of this. I think it will get worse if we have a Justice Kavanaugh. But I think it's just a matter of the degree of the worst, and so then we have to think about as people who are resisting this system, what does it look like to do that, and how do we have conversations that really do sort of challenge ourselves to think beyond what is always been imposed on us as the inevitable structures that we're working with.
Ideas, Sarah?
Well, yes, I do have ideas. For the last 18 years, I've been running something called the ACT UP Oral History Project. And
Brilliantly, I might add.
Thank you.
ACT UP Oral History. What is that?
Well, ACT UP is an organization that Ann and I were both members of, and this was part of the AIDS activist movement that turned around the conditions for people with AIDS in the United States. So I've interviewed 187 people over 18 years, and I'm now analyzing the data to analyze it politically and look at what strategies worked and why. One of the things that really made ACT UP work was that it had very high tolerance for different opinions. And in fact, the organization was structured in such a way that if you wanted to do something and I didn't want to do it, I actually just wouldn't do it. I wouldn't try to stop you from doing it. So that there was no direction towards consensus, and everything was about simultaneity of action. And I think we can learn a lot from that now, because the range of people under attack from Trump, et cetera, is so broad that to ask any of those people to agree on strategies or analyses or even on language and word choice is counterproductive.
And I see that in this whole discussion in the Democratic Party of, oh, you know, we can't have different factions. We can't have outliers. We have to choose a way of either the conventional or the more lefty. We can't, this tension between the two would not work. And I completely agree with you about ACT UP. And the beauty to me of ACT UP was always the open conversation, that anybody could say anything while respecting everybody else in the room.
It's not just say, it's do.
Yes, but it started with that conversation.
If we want to build a movement where people really can respond from where they're at, and let me just say, as someone who's about to turn 60 in 2 weeks,
Congratulations.
One of the things I've learned about life is people can only be where they're at. You wish they were somewhere else, but they're not. So we have to be able to facilitate people responding in a way that makes sense to them from where they're at, that's simultaneous across communities. And that, unfortunately, is the opposite of where we are right now, which is very conformist and trying to force each other into boxes.
Yes.
Do you, sorry, can I ask a question?
Which is, conversation.
Well, which I also, I just am curious, because I think I'm sort of shocked that we're not looking to ACT UP more in our conversations in the LGBTQ movement as for lessons. It's just the ahistorical nature of living in the United States has just infiltrated everything, and we just stopped looking at the past and trying to learn. But I'm curious if you think that aspect of ACT UP, what is the role of sort of that shifting over time and the rise of sort of a policy, legal-oriented approach to AIDS-related work, and to what extent does that type of sort of allow many flowers to bloom approach get squandered when you're looking at moving things into a legal structure and narrative?
Well, I mean, there's a long answer, and I'll try to be succinct. You know, AIDS changed everything. And one of the things that happened, I think, the day that we went into St. Patrick's Cathedral and disrupted Mass was that suddenly things like gay marriage became very acceptable. Whereas prior to AIDS, gay marriage was considered impossible, same-sex marriage. But when you had a group of homosexuals disrupting church services, suddenly this normalizing strategy became acceptable. And since that time, we've had what I consider to be a period of white reconciliation. That's really what I've seen as the trajectory for the gay movement. Whereas white gay people who were kicked out of their families because of familial homophobia, which is a very significant historical force. And I'm not saying that the gay movement was not racist, it always was racist, but there was a separation of white gay people who wanted to be out from whiteness. But through this normalization of parenthood and marriage and privatized nuclear family, there's been a reconciliation with the white family of origin. And this has, in a sense, has welcomed queer people back into whiteness. So that we now have a new kind of queer, which is that we have gay white people joining whiteness, and then we have, as everyone at this table knows, immigrant, not undocumented, incarcerated, poverty-stricken queer people who are who alone occupy the role of the social queer. So that's the direction that we've gone in. You know,
So what direction are we going to go?
Well, I was going to, Mustafa, you work with youth
Yes.
and
What are they saying?
marginalized youth.
Well, I mean, I think there is a way that people are looking outside of the system and also looking at how to control the system from outside. Meaning that the more that we push on the issues around like incarceration, the more that we, fight against like any borders in this country, the more that we bring the marginalized to the center, the more clarity comes, right? But also there's a clarity amongst, we're all not gonna do, we're not all gonna join Black Lives Matter, and we all shouldn't. We're not all gonna fight the fight on the borders in the same way as someone who's directly impacted. But in order for us to create communities where we actually can resist, we have to support each other and surround each other, and also divert dollars away from whiteness, divert our whole strategy around LGBTQ away from gay marriage. We have to actively force that to change, because we know, regardless of where gay marriage is right now, the folks who actually created the space for gay marriage were LGBTQ folks of color, were trans women of color, who are now facing higher incarceration rates, a continuing rate of high HIV cases, a continuing murder rate that's really, really heartbreaking, and really taking some of our strongest community members away from doing, stuff like elections. But that doesn't mean we have to now blind ourselves, right? Like, oh, we're running into an election, we want Bernie Sanders, so we're not going to pay attention to the issue of Palestine, or we're not going to pay attention to issues of mass incarceration.
But also,
so I think that what I'm saying is that the folks who are, under 40, I'm saying under 40, but really under 30, because I'm 37. But the young folks in our community really understand all these nuances, and some are working elections, and some are just working to get people out of detention and actively protesting. And all of this is possible because the same is true of the right. They didn't just come to this point because Trump became president. This is years and years of hatred that's been stole back to Ronald Reagan's years, right? That now has a political form and is now solidifying. But it doesn't mean that everyone was all working to get Trump elected, because we know that he had enemies on the right. And actually, probably right now, he still has enemies, but they're in charge, so they pretend to all be aligned. Right? We can do some of that work, but we have to stop, like we talk about, we mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, right? Well, apparently Joe Crowley is still on the ballot,
right,
because he's having a Twitter battle. Like, this is the kind of stuff this is what I was saying earlier, right? There's anti-Trump, and then there's the cleaning that we have to do in our own community, whatever the left is supposed to be.
I want to go back to the thing that you raised about pressures on poor people and obstacles to organizing, because, there are a lot of people who do not know that people are losing Section 8 vouchers, that people are losing their food stamps, that they're being asked to pay back enormous, that these frames
Medicaid
are being disintegrated right now. And, that's further fraying any kind of social fabric around poverty.
And I think, which goes back to something you said earlier, which is like, if you look at Roe v. Wade and the legal structure that it set up was, we have sort of always removed sort of barriers to things and never created access to them, and that we don't have redistributive impulses at all in society and in our movements too frequently, I think, and that's something that we always see, at least, in pockets, and I think ACT UP is one of the bigger examples of it, as was the Black Panther Party and their sort of social welfare programs, was actually keeping people alive. What can we do? Where can we get food? Where can we get bail? Where can we get these resources? And I do think people have been for a long time building these networks. I think what I'm hoping is that as people start to panic about the federal judiciary, as people start to panic about the places where others have devoted resources, they may look to power building resources, even if we're not all directing it in the same way, allowing the facilitation of resource distribution in a different way, maybe something that our movements can actually do, not just at the outskirts, but the well-resourced wings of our movements as well.
We also have to learn from the flaws of these movements, because, I think that ACT UP is heroic. But ACT UP also had a lot of flaws, because all human beings do. And the question of access was the issue that divided ACT UP. And now today, the AIDS activist movement, working with science and with sympathetic people in pharmaceutical companies, produced treatments that work, but only 1/3 of HIV-positive Americans have access to the standard of care right now. So the issue of access did not accompany the issue of creating new medications. And that is partially the fault of the activist movements, who were divided on the question.
And I would say, to the extent that particularly young Black and brown people still getting infected, education has also been withheld, and access to information and to strategies to prevent new infections, let alone access to treatment and care.
Well, this is
and access to the history too, right? Because a lot
yeah.
of folks don't really know the history of LGBTQ people of color movements, right? We're just starting to see critical reflections of folks like well, the one thing I'm thinking about right now is Pose, right? You actually have like trans women of color actresses. It's beautiful, it's heartbreaking, but it's also the closest, I would say, real telling of what actually happened in our communities in the late 80s, right? But that's like new, right? Like this just happened. So how many folks don't know? How many folks come out and have no idea, right? How many folks might see like all these movies around gay marriage that, you know, the Normal Heart comes to mind, is really like this white telling of history, right? Like all these white folks went to, you know, Fire Island. I'm joking about the movie. It's technically a good movie if you take out. Yeah, there are worse ones, right? I mean, but they took out. They just sort of whitewashed the history, right? And there was even this horrible Stonewall movie that luckily so many people just organized and got together. But you know, like that's a huge part of the problem, because in that time, this was when the community was actually the most active, and now.
Well,
we're growing.
I want to get Chase's take on Pose.
I love Pose. I mean, I am someone who, you know, I think my job as a lawyer is as a storyteller, and I think storytelling is such a critical part of the work that I am doing. And, you know, is Pose perfect? Probably not, but it feels perfect right now because it's about, you know, seeing sort of these tender, beautiful, complex narratives that reconcile with the ways in which people's bodies are weaponized, the ways, but that they're just trying to exist within them, and sort of the height of the rise of the war on drugs, and the contrast, the rise of Trump, and I think too, it connects so brilliantly, sort of the sort of capitalism of the '80s and the drug use of the cocaine use of the rise of sort of the Wall Street in the '80s, and Trump, and sort of you see where it leads today, which at the time it was sort of about deregulation and sort of consolidation of wealth, but it was always about white supremacy, and you see how it sort of evolved into the Trump we have now. So you not only are seeing sort of the resistance spaces of queer people of color surviving and making beautiful art and family structures, but you see what was going on in Wall Street, and
Trump is
in the show, and it's about, and he is sort of the foil, and that is exactly, you sort of see how these spaces evolved. But I mean, I think that the kinship structures, the community, the way in which trans bodies are talked about and reconciled and claimed is something that I've never seen before, and it's so powerful.
And Scarlett Johansson is not in it. Look at that.
I want to say that the Normal Heart is actually accurate, because it actually depicts the true story of how white gay men, when they were dying, were completely excluded from power and no one would listen to them in that moment. It's not universally the entire story, but it is a true story. And there's a lot of...
It was just whitewashed. It was just whitewashed. It was like one brown person in the corner did something, and then all of a sudden, I think she was a lesbian, and she went away.
But it's also... Don't you also think that those white men, and this, I've repeated myself for years on this, that when they saw that they were going to be allowed to die because they didn't have power, they were offended because they thought they should have power, and they were arrogant enough to fight back and to organize, and we all glommed right onto them because we had come from various movements. We saw the power dynamics there.
Well, the second part I don't totally agree with, but I just want to say, if we're going to talk about AIDS representation by corporate entities, which is what we're talking about right now, the Normal Heart, I think, is accurate. What I'm worried about are things like Philadelphia, things that show, or even Angels in America, things that show gay people abandoning each other, having no movement, that there's one black person who doesn't know any other black people, you know, that they're dependent on the benevolent heterosexual to overcome their prejudices. All of that is false. That is propaganda, you know, to say that straight people are the heroes of AIDS. You see that also in Dallas Buyers Club.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
But I think Pose, Janet's
Poses
episode,
the Billy Porter episode.
Oh,
that was very amazing.
It was, I mean, you haven't seen it. You haven't seen it. So the Billy Porter, so I think the episode that really takes on AIDS most directly is the one that Janet Mock directs, and it is one of the most powerful episodes of television that I've ever seen. I do think it is about the lens, and it's about the frame, and it does a lot of things at once. It doesn't make people the victims. It makes them the agents of their story, and you see the lens, you see it as in Janet's view, and I think that's incredibly powerful. I don't think representation is going to be the only thing that moves us in this moment. I think it is helping people in crisis feel some degree of hope, which is really important. And I would add Vida to the list of shows that, which is a show about gentrification in Los Angeles with a Latinx showrunner, entirely Latinx writing room, which you can also see the lens, and it's so different and so queer, and the generations of queerness that are represented. I would add it to Pose. I think it should be on there.
And Pose has grown already in half a dozen episodes, I think, has become richer and smarter and deeper, and has been renewed for a second season.
It has.
But I mean, this is all happening in the midst as the republic crumbles around us. So the question. Well, I mean, look, I'm a theater critic, and they give me these Broadway tickets, and I sit there and I go, the drama in the streets right now is 10 times better than anything that's happening in the theater practically. So I don't know if what role culture is going to play in this movement. What I'm more interested right now, because I don't want to run out of time, is signs of hope and things that you're doing that are giving you the most satisfaction and giving you the most hope.
Well, I love Cynthia Nixon, and I think she's been running a fantastic campaign, and she's been raising all the issues the right way. So I'm very inspired by her.
And that is your entire repository.
That's what I feel good about right now.
We love her too, but we're not holding our breath that she's going to win this election.
It's great to hear an idea in public that I actually can get behind.
It is shocking. I agree.
Great, shocking. Both things. Yeah.
Mustafa?
I'm just thrilled that my young people are activists and organizers. Right now we're supporting and building a youth bail fund. We're trying to get folks out of prison who are faced with all different types of high bails. And so my hope is what I see is that people are donating, that it continues to grow, and that our community is continuing to care for each other in really deep, intentional ways. And also we're organizing with the knowledge that, if we're going to survive, we have to take care of each other. So that's what really inspires me.
Excuse me, but isn't there also a big bail reform movement to reduce these things overall for people?
Yeah.
Legislation this session? No? Yes?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is we have a similar situation in New York State that we have in New York City, that you have one side that will push progressive ideas and another side that just will ignore and shoot it down. But there is push that's happening on the state level. But in the meantime, we just have to get our people out. We have to do as much as we can to fight that.
I'm very curious about whether we can rely on coming generations to rescue all of the rest of us old people and the country. And you have worked with gay-straight alliances for a long time, and now with Fierce. And so I'd really like to hear more about what younger people are thinking and doing, and what their lives are like, and what their whole outlook is.
Well, the first thing is protecting each other, right? Like the majority of the young people I work with are homeless, and so they still face family acceptance issues. And so what we create is a culture where we can take care of each other, where we can support each other, where the young people can help each other get housing and get support for activism, right? So it's not just that you're going to go to a rally, you're actually going to use the work that you're doing to actually support each other and move things forward. In this city right now, we actually have a pretty active support for ending youth homelessness amongst young people who are LGBTQ. And what we do, the city has agreed recently to create new LGBTQ centers and to create 24-hour drop-in center in Manhattan. We know that is going to impact a small percentage of we would estimate over 400,000 young people who are, or over 400,000 young LGBTQ people are right now living on the streets or in the shelter system. And our belief is that in order for us to get them out of that system, you have to.
400,000 in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem is that the city doesn't count properly, right? How do you count homeless folks if you're not where homeless folks are? If you're not, if you're putting them in jail, right? Like a lot of times we have move-on orders from police departments who basically are like, oh, you're sitting outside. Oh, we have to get you off of this nice corner so that some Midwesterner can buy something weird.
Or you're walking while trans.
What percentage of that are female?
I don't know exactly. We know that We call it a Fierce 40 campaign, so we know at least 40% of those young folks are like, 18 and under. So that's also a problem, right? Is that it's not just young people are coming, like it's, a lot of people are like, oh, more folks are coming out, right? They're coming out and get kicked out. But I don't know, and I don't want to give like this percentage, but a lot, if that makes sense.
Females have a lower earning capacity, and also my impression is, this is old information for me, that girls leave find family situations intolerable because of sexual abuse and whatever. So that in homeless populations, queer homeless populations, females are overrepresented.
Well, I would also add that, depending on your own gender identity in your family, and if you identify as trans, you're more likely to have more and more of these problems, whether it be sexual abuse, whether it be families kicking you out of your home. Trans women of color, for example, graduate high school at a 10% rate, right? And so I think that there's definitely, besides sexual orientation, we know that gender identity and gender expression is a large issue that's actually connected to why, like it's not just people who are coming out, it's like, oh, you're coming out and you're defying gender roles, you're defying sexuality roles, and so unfortunately we still have families that are putting people out to the streets.
But I think what Mustafa referred to, which you talked about earlier, is this whole, the community taking care of itself and not relying on the power structure that clearly is not interested in anything but its own perpetuating hierarchy.
Yeah, I've always found hope in sort of I live in Jackson Heights, Queens, and I feel like the sort of trans Latinx organizers there who have, most of whom have been undocumented, have always, there are no government systems taking care of them. They're sharing resources and building power that way. I think there were moments of hope that things would change, that there'd be increased access to hormones, there'd be increased access to HIV medication. I think that this moment of reckoning is not to say that Obama was perfect. I don't think that at all. I do think people were getting some more things in some tangible ways, and things have gotten worse. And so I think now it's about, well, given people's fear, given the crisis, given people are already dying and being incarcerated, how do we sort of not lose hope? Because I think that's important. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I want us to be looking at the movements that we've had in the past, thinking of how learning from our past lessons. And I really do find hope from from art, and even if it's corporate art on television, even if it's Pose, even if it's the theater, that's where I find it, because to me it's sort of building. It's like sort of the reminder that we can think about worlds outside the ones we were conditioned to believe are the only ones possible. And I really believe in that as a sort of way to keep moving in the work, even as I'm going to federal court and arguing for X. And that's as not a very artistic, creative moment, unfortunately, but then going home and watching Pose, or going to see Jagged Little Pill in Boston, and think about, well, what are we going to be able to bring into our artistic production, and what kind of narratives are going to be a part of that. That gives me hope, which I think is hard to come by these days, but still important.
And on a personal level, how do we cope?
Well, I make art, so I'm actually collaborating with Marianne Faithfull, of all people.
Really?
Yes, on a stage musical using her 50-year catalog.
Wow.
So that's my exciting project for now.
And you have other projects too. Do you,
Right.
Do you buy Chase's, as an artist, do you buy this, the national conversation publicly in culture has an impact?
Well, I'm an insider, so I have a completely different view than you do. I think the theater is sickeningly conservative and is serving a very, very tiny demographic.
That's true.
Television is more advanced than the live arts.
Yeah.
In books, it's very broad. I have a new novel coming out in September. It's about police violence and mentality of being a police officer. On a certain level, it's about that. And it was very easy for me to find a place for that. So, you know, but theater is really the bastion of the old way.
There you go, Andy.
I know. It used to be more daring than television, but now, absolutely not. Well, that's also the new media environment that we're in. Anybody, people come to me and they say, I would love to do a show. I said, do a show. Anybody can do a show, and anybody can set up a camera, put their thing up, and become a star. Not just, I'm just a star, but you can do substantial things. The media is not controlled by gatekeepers as much anymore.
Well, it certainly doesn't have to be, and many millions of people have proved that. No?
That's not really true.
Social media?
Oh, social media.
Yeah, because you can bypass all that, and they're all having to scramble to deal with it.
And we've been here for more than 30 years, and they give us an hour of airtime every week. Why? But we reach a lot of people. Can we take one little side trip to our personal bugaboo at the moment that we're working on, which are these hideous corporate pride parades, and what has happened to the movement that started hundreds of years ago, but that burst forth most famously 50 years ago as of next year. I don't want to make Stonewall the marker, but it is in certain ways. And we're coming up on Stonewall 50 next year, and we have a pride parade that I walked away from in disgust this year at the total giveaway to corporations of a party atmosphere that I just found repellent.
Movement groups are just sort of the window dressing for this corporate parade at this point.
If even.
And by the way, the reason I think people, and I've said it before, and maybe people disagree, but the reason Stonewall was significant, even though there were other uprisings, was because it led to immediate and constant and ongoing organizing.
Yeah.
And it never stopped.
So,
and that's why it's significant, and that's what we have to revive today, is organizing.
So we're getting back to organizing and trying to recreate that spirit, revive that spirit, specifically here with a large civil rights movement next year, running probably concurrently with the corporate pride parade. Everybody out into the streets. What do you think?
Well, I'm one of the founders of the original Dyke March, and so I think, and we also have the Trans March and the Drag March now. And the most important expressions are the ones that are done without police permits, with no corporate involvement of any kind.
Just people in the streets.
And no control over messaging or how people look or what they want to say. And that is how you have a free movement.
Yeah. You on board with that, Mustafa?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is... the saddest part about Pride to me is this wedding, and I call it a wedding because that's what it looks like with mainstream Pride, police department, and corporations. Like it just looks like a big fest that they've created.
Correction officers march this year.
Well, I mean, that's, I don't even know what to say. Yeah. They have rainbow cars and they have all these weird, it doesn't even just strike me as weird, it strikes me as beyond offensive.
Yeah.
However, there's this weird opportunity that I have each year to bring young people, and so I'm always thinking about, okay, well, they want to go to Pride, and how do we educate them about what Pride is really about and give them the real history.
We'll try to give them a separate opportunity next year.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely join the larger movement.
Well, there's a town hall meeting July 31st at the LGBT Center here on West 13th Street, 7 to 9 p.m. So please.
And we'll be co-moderating.
Yeah.
Not with me.
Because that's my lifelong job.
Well, no, seriously, this is your chance to come and say, no, I love the way things are. Why are you spoiling it? Or, yeah, we're sick of it.
Don't bother.
We're sick of standing around on a side street for 5 hours in order to go out and march behind a noisy float from T-Mobile.
Well, just across the street. I mean, you can't really cross the street.
Yeah. So, and what could be simpler than just having people march in the streets, as we've seen in the last 2 women's marches against Trump and
marches in London against Trump. That's
Yes.
that's what it could look like.
thank
Everybody
heavens.
bring your own sign, put up your own issue,
It
and
doesn't have
march
to
behind,
cost a lot of money.
march.
It can be very simple, but we need a critical mass of people there. So
support
that's really the work that has to be done, is educating people and showing them they have this
We hope you'll bring it up
opportunity.
at the ACLU.
In fact, one of my assignments is to contact the ACLU to talk about this, but I don't know whether
there you
you're
go.
going to bring millions of people into the street.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I think that, certainly there'll be other, people who are as eager to do this as all of us. I mean, I don't like the permanent corporate extravaganza at all, and I think it's just, I just feel like you're always running up against a metal gate and a float that's from a corporation and police officers, and frankly, I don't know that I've ever been to New York Pride, maybe once.
Yeah, well, you haven't missed much.
Yeah.
I've been to 45 of them. I have, since 1974. And I get sicker and sicker.
Well, my attendance has been very spotty in recent years.
You were a grand marshal on a horse.
I rented a horse to be a grand marshal in the parade, but the Dyke March is really where my heart is, and I was back there this year, and it was terrific. We just have a couple of minutes left, so final thoughts,
Messages
inspiration,
to the world.
things you want people to do.
Support criminal justice reform, support the end to ongoing police departments, support the Fierce Youth Bail Fund. We're trying to get folks out in this system that continues to grow and criminalize more of our young people.
And they can go to fiercenyc.org, right?
They can go to
We'll put that in our show
fiercenyc.org
note to viewers.
or go to our Facebook.
Okay.
I would say stand up wherever you are, express in the way that makes sense to who you are, and let's stop micro-critique of each other, and each of us put forth a strategy that we feel serves our vision.
Chase?
I think just continuing to find joy in life if it's possible, and connecting with the people close to you, because I think it can be really isolating and people are hurting, and so the more that we can take care of each other, the better.
I think that's an excellent message, and at a time when we're all feeling angry and upset at a lot of what's going on.
You know, people write on Facebook and things, this is like the worst I've ever seen in history and all this kind of stuff, and I'm thinking, well, I mean, even just go back to the Iraq War and us upending the Middle East and, killing hundreds of thousands of people on blood on our hands.
I think we have many examples.
So I would, and of course, we're of a certain age, and we remember when there were no reproductive rights, basically. I mean, people couldn't even get contraception in some cases. But we found a way to get it for people. And we found a way to get women abortions. And we found a way as gay people to care for each other and support each other. And, if they're going to take away benefits, we have to take care of each other. These are the kinds of things that we have to do.
And my message is always the same, and it plays off a lot of what all of you have been saying, which is I am not out here to tell people what to do, but I am here to tell people do something. And if we all do something that appeals to us, that feels right to us, that will all add up to better work for everybody. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
For showing up. We
Tune in next
appreciate
week. Rob Shooter will be my co-host.
Yes, he will. And that'll be entertaining. And we will see you all next week.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.